Jesus's priorities have now all of a sudden shifted so that mom and dad are not at the top of the list. Do you remember how old you were when you took your first solo trip away from your parents? Um, I know now in today's world, it's common to send kids on airplane trips, and I know some even pre-adolescent kids have taken airplane trips to visit family members. Um, my first airplane trip was when I was 4 years old. It was with a plane load of Korean orphans. They loaded us up in Seoul, Korea, and we landed in LaGuardia in New York, and we were taken away by people who didn't speak Korean, and it was not a fun time for anybody, kids or adults, initially. But fortunately, I don't remember that trip. The first trip I do remember is when we had moved from D.C. to Manassas, which was a bedroom community of D.C. Now it's this full-on city, and it's kind of grown, but um, the National Geographic Society has a museum, and they used to put on these movies where their different explorers would come and kind of give their own documentary about what was happening and what they had done and where they had gone. And so my mom would put my brother and my younger brother and myself on a Greyhound bus in Manassas, and we would go into DC, into the bus terminal there. And then my dad would pick us up, and we would go to the National Geographic Museum. And we watched the movie, and everything was fine, except one time, and it was one of the early times, I think, maybe even the first one. We got on the bus, we get off the Greyhound in downtown DC, and you know, if you've ever taken the Greyhound bus or public bus, long distance buses, you know that the bus terminals and stations are not in the nicest parts of town. They might have been nice parts of town at one point, but by the time years have gone, you have a lot of riffraff, people that sleep in the bus station. You know, stranger danger would be a real kind of a concern back in those days, and maybe even today's. Well, so my dad forgot to pick us up. So my brother and I are in the DC bus station there, and there's all of these individuals there in different states of sobriety and situations of life. And we're just waiting. We're waiting half an hour, and then an hour, and then dad doesn't show up. And so I borrowed some money from a person, and then called on a payphone. And then my mom called my dad, and then he showed up. But that was a pretty traumatic. I mean, I remember that. I don't remember the trip from Korea, but I remember that time when Dad forgot us in the bus station. You know, it's pretty traumatic being a kid in a strange place, surrounded by strange people, when you don't really know anybody there. Now, thinking about that, do you think it's harder being a parent or a kid in the growing up kind of process? Let's see. How many of you would say it's harder being a kid growing up in your house? Well, let's say just in a house in general, not your house, because I don't want to get any parents in trouble. How many of you would say it's harder being a kid? All right. Yep. Most of the kids. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. I see a definite swing in the to the younger people of the audience. How many of you would say it's more difficult being a parent? Yeah. See, this is what the kids have to go against. You guys think you have it hard. Well, it is difficult being a parent, right? Because you first met these beautiful little babies, and you have their pictures, and you have their little booties, and you kept their baby teeth, and you have all these fond memories of these little sweet little urchins that would just sit there and be sweet and never cause any problems. But then they grow up and they turn 12 years old. And then all of a sudden now they have a voice, and they have an opinion, and they have the ability to exercise their will in different kinds of ways. I think for a 12-year-old, the hardest job you've got is to obey the adults who live in that house, who think that this is their house. And somehow you have to convince them that you know what you're doing. If they would just leave the house to you, that you could run life a whole lot better. And so it's this tug of war between the parents and the kids. Well, in today's text, we find a 12-year-old Jesus. For the first time in the biblical text, he's going to speak. And his words could have a bite. We really don't know what the tone was when Jesus responded. But what we do know is that 12-year-old Jesus is a handful compared to sweet little baby Jesus away in a manger. Because baby Jesus, no crying does he make. He's so sweet and nice and cuddly, and we like babies. Babies can't talk back. They can get fussy. They can cry, but they can't say, "Don't ever grab my cheek again. Put me down." Try grabbing the cheeks of an adolescent 12-year-old. See how that goes. In this text, Jesus speaks and speaks back to his parents, to the temple authorities, and also to us. Now, the text starts by saying that, as was their tradition, Mary and Joseph went to the temple for Passover celebration, as they did every year. The law required the males to go, but because Joseph and Mary are exemplary Jews, both husband and wife go, and it seems to be an unremarkable Passover event. The drama comes when, after the first day of leaving Jerusalem, Joseph and Mary assumed that Jesus was off playing and walking and with other family members and neighbors and people from their town. And at the evening meal, when they're gathering and getting ready to bed down for the night, wherever they were in their journey, they couldn't find Jesus. And so the anxiety sets in. They can't really head back to Jerusalem in the middle of the night. There's no street lights. It would have been a very dangerous thing to do. So they wait until the morning. You can imagine that they didn't sleep all night long, just fretting and anxious and worried and concerned. And then they wake up, and what they find is that everybody is leaving Jerusalem and they're trying to go upstream. It's kind of like when the turnpike opens up in one direction, everybody's going north to get out of the path of a hurricane. And if you just happen to be the unlucky soul trying to go south, trying to come into Miami during a hurricane, it's like impossible because everybody's trying to move in one direction. Well, they were going against the flow. After fighting and jostling and getting through people, they retrace their steps and they finally find Jesus at the temple. Now, the text says that he was asking questions. And typically when we think of a young man or girl, lady, asking questions in a educational kind of a context, we're thinking they're asking questions because they really don't know what's going on and they're needing clarification and they want answers. But the Jewish way of teaching was to ask questions. The teacher was the one who asked the questions. And so in a sense, what we have is Jesus teaching the rabbis and them being amazed at how much he knew and where this wealth of knowledge was coming from. And Mary and Joseph walk up on this scene, and rather than begin with, "How did you know to ask that question?" their first response is all of this pent-up frustration. You know, we can imagine the kinds of things Mary would have asked. "Where did you sleep last night? Have you eaten today? Were any strangers sniffing around you last night? Oh, and do you know how worried we were? How could you do this to us?" And Jesus' response doesn't sound that warm and fuzzy, does it? Why are you worried about me? I'm good. Yeah, but you're a 12-year-old son. Yeah, but didn't you know that I was dealing with stuff about my dad, my father? Either in my father's house or dealing with my father's business? And Jesus says this to Joseph. And you can imagine Joseph saying, "Hey, I'm right here. I'm right here." But Jesus isn't talking about Joseph. And this is the first inkling that we have from Jesus' perspective, that he understands this dual identity he has of being the son of a human and at the same time the son of a divine being. And this tension of Jesus being fully human He has a bed to sleep in and a house to live in, and he takes meals with his family. And at the same time, being fully God with all of the ideas and characteristics that we would assume and assign to deity, it makes it mind-boggling for us. At 12 years old, did Jesus know everything, past, present, and future? Did Jesus have the ability to tap into the wealth of information that God knew from all time? What were there two parts to his brain, the human side and the divine side, and could he switch back and forth? See, we typically go at this following Greek philosophy, and this is how the early church kind of categorized these situations. They start off saying, well, we know what God is. God is omnipotent, God is omniscient, God is omnipresent. Omnipotent, he's all-powerful. Omniscient, he's all-knowing. Omnipresent, he's everywhere, in all places, at all times. Immutable, he never changes. And that's what God is. So then we try and put Jesus into those categories, and he doesn't fit. And so there was this difficulty in really, truly accepting that Jesus was God, because he didn't fit into these little boxes that they had made of what God does. And this idea of the incarnation had been fought and debated and finessed over the years. And I think a much healthier way to look at it is, once we decide by faith that Jesus is God's Son, whatever he does is what God does. If Jesus does it, that's what God does, because Jesus is God. And this is the first time that we're struggling with this in the text of Luke. It's the first time Mary and Joseph are really struggling with it. And we really don't know what this means to be about the Father's business. N.T. Wright, in one of his commentaries, observed something that I hadn't thought about before. He says in Luke chapter 2, you've got two disciples on a path trying to find Jesus. They've lost Jesus. He said when you get to Luke chapter 24, at the end of this same gospel, you've got two disciples on the road to Emmaus, and they have lost Jesus as well, in a different way. Because the Jesus they were looking for is not there. The Messiah they were looking for has disappeared. And the individual that they thought was the Messiah is now dead. So you have this bookends of people on the road trying to find Jesus. And what Jesus tells his parents, and what Jesus tells the disciples in Emmaus is, why are you guys freaking? I'm here to do what God sent me to do. And that doesn't mean living in the temple, like Samuel might have lived in the temple, or Anna, as we saw last week. But rather it means that Jesus' priorities have now all of a sudden shifted so that mom and dad are not at the top of the list. But it also means that Jim is not at the top of the list. Because you see, in my relationship with God, I want to think that God puts me at the top of his list. You've all heard or seen perhaps or read the Max Lucado quote that if God had a refrigerator, your picture would be on it. It's a beautiful thought. But you know what? There are things that God is dealing with that don't take me being on his refrigerator in the highest priority. Jesus is about his Father's business. And what Jesus is asking his parents to do is to let go of this image of baby Jesus in a manger and to begin the process of drawing near to this adult Jesus who thinks and acts and behaves very differently. One of our family's favorite all-time movies ever is Fiddler on the Roof. If you've never seen it, please do what it takes to buy it, to rent it, and watch it. It's a musical. A lot of nice songs came from that movie. But one of them is where Tevye and Goldie are singing together Sunrise, Sunset. As they contemplate the marriage of their firstborn daughter, they sing and ask, "Is this the little girl I carried? Is this the little boy at play? I don't remember growing older. When did they? When did she get to be such a beauty? And when did he become so tall? Wasn't it just yesterday when they were so small? Sunrise, sunset. Swiftly flow the days. Seedlings turn overnight into sunflowers, blossoming even as we gaze. Swiftly fly the years, one season following another, laden with happiness and tears. Sunrise, sunset. Beautiful song, beautiful movie. And what Jesus is asking his parents to do is to allow their perceptions and misconceptions of Jesus go down with the sun, and to have the courage to face this new day and this new Jesus with faith and with trust, even if they didn't understand. You know, letting go of our kids and of those conceptions that we have of Jesus are hard. Every single one of us, when we came to faith with ideas of who God was and what he should do and what the expectations are. And letting go of those images and those concepts and those expectations are hard. I mean, we go to God saying, "Hey, God, you're a healer." Jesus was a healer. And so when we're sick, we expect to be healed. And when we're not, we don't understand what God's doing. We know that Jesus was compassionate and God is compassionate. And so when we go to God with our problems and we bare our souls and we ask God to intervene and we don't get the answer we're looking for, we don't understand. And what we're trying to do is to fit God into our ideas of how he should act and how we should live. And what God is saying is, you can't put me in a box. I don't fit. There are things that I'm doing that you have no clue about. And what might seem like the most horrible, horrific, ungodly thing that we could be living through might be just what it takes for God to complete his mission in me, our family, or in the world. And it's hard to let go of baby Jesus and embrace adult Jesus. Jesus on a mission, and that mission is not to make me happy. But you know, letting go is hard, but drawing near is also kind of hard. It's a process. And what it requires is that every single day we go back to the biblical text, we look at Jesus, and we try and clear our mind of what we expect Jesus to do, and just take him for what the text says he does and he is. For the rest of this preaching calendar through Pentecost will be at the end of May. We're going to be focusing on stories from the Gospel of Luke, and we're going to see Jesus do things that we don't expect God to do. That's not how God should act. That's not a respectable way for God to do things. And again, the challenge is not to do things the way we think God should, but rather to understand that God is God and that he has the big picture in mind, And his goal is to save as many as possible. That's his goal. Fill heaven with every single person on earth, however it might look. The good news that I want to leave you with today is that if you don't understand how this works, that's okay. God doesn't need you to understand how it works in order for you to be loved and in order for you to love him. You know, I have no clue how airplanes work. Literally no clue. I have a friend who's a pilot, and he's tried to explain me the aerodynamics. I said, no. You've got this multi-ton thing full of people and gasoline, and but I still get on a plane. I still fly. I just tighten my seatbelt up real tight. You don't have to understand everything about how God works in order for him to love you and in order for you to be loved. And so keep that thought in mind, that as we struggle with understanding Jesus throughout this entire process, we're basking in God's love. And we have the opportunity to love him and to love others.